Armstrong, 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 Armstrong,
Welcome to this national edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. You know, we focus so much on the presidential debates, the national elections, given that Joe Biden is up for re-election, and we don't always focus on the important local and statewide races across the country. We're commencing a new series today between now and the election in November 2024. We will feature candidates who are serious contenders for office in other parts of the United States. And today, Bernie Moreno, who's a businessman and a candidate for the United States Senate in Ohio, joins us today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. As you can see, traveling all over the state of Ohio. So this is where I live, inside a car. We've driven 70,000 miles in the last 7 months, believe it or not.
What have you found that's worthy to die for at this point in your life?
Well, the reality is, as you know, Armstrong, I came to this country legally as a kid from South America. I was born in Colombia. This country gave me every opportunity in the world to succeed. I was able to start with every cent I had into one little tiny dealership, built it into one of the largest dealer groups in the country, then started a tech company. And I look at this country and I see us going off a cliff. And for me, this is my opportunity to serve my country and give back to the country that gave me every opportunity in the world to succeed. And that's why I'm running for the U.S. Senate.
What is it that Sherrod Brown is not doing that you feel you can do better?
Well, he's not taking care of working Americans. So those are the very people he says he helps. His votes, that positions he's taken in the United States Senate has led to an exodus of manufacturing capacity in Ohio. We, at one point, we had 6 of the wealthiest 14 cities in America. At one point, we're barely in the top 50. You have places like Toledo, Youngstown, Dayton, Cleveland that were once very, very prosperous cities. And thanks to terrible public policy, these cities are now a shell of their former selves. And we have to regain that. We have to rebuild our industrial capacity, our industrial might, rebuild our working class. And that's what I'm committed to do down in Washington, D.C.
You know, many people looked at Ohio in the recent election where your state voted to include the right to an abortion in the Constitution. You're running as a Republican. Are the voters saying that they don't care about the issues or morality and the social issues, or are they just saying, let us celebrate our free will, which God has given us, and let's deal with God and let him judge us and not the government involving itself in this aspect of our lives?
Well, I think the voters were given a choice between two polar extremes. One, almost a near ban on abortion with no exceptions for rape and incest, and a 40-week unlimited abortion anytime, partial birth abortions, late-term abortions. And given that choice, the voters chose to keep abortion legal. I think we can start looking at what are the things that we can agree on. Let's make it easier for a mom to raise a kid. Let's make it less expensive to raise kids in America. Let's develop pro-family policies. And I think if we refocus our efforts there, we can start to win the hearts and minds of the people who don't agree with us on these social issues. But the voters have spoken. And I think what we got to do is focus on the issues that they really care about, which is the cost of groceries, the cost of gas, the fact that we have turmoil all over the world. We have an energy policy which is backwards. Those are the issues that I'm going to campaign on, and that's how we're going to beat Sherrod Brown.
How important, what importance should we place on morality, integrity, and ethics as it relates to our leaders? You look at a flawed ex-president Donald Trump, the possibility he may win the GOP nomination again. You look at George Santos, who was found guilty on every ethics violation, and now they're asking him to resign. Does that have importance, or has Donald Trump lowered the bar so that anybody can run for president? The morality and the ethics and the integrity is not as important as it once were.
Well, I'd push back a little bit on that. I wouldn't make those comparisons. I think those are all allegations against President Trump. The reality is Joe Biden is the one who's lowered the bar. He's probably the most corrupt president in American history. We have the receipts. We've seen text messages. We've seen literally wire transfers. We have a lot of people like Dianne Feinstein and Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden who've made enormous sums of money being in elected office. I don't think this country was ever intended to have a political class. The idea that we have people who start out at a very low net worth and yet go into public service and all of a sudden are very, very wealthy. You know, Nancy Pelosi is very good at picking stocks. None of that should be allowed, Armstrong. We need people who've accomplished something in our lives to go to D.C. as public service and then come home after a fixed period of time. That's what our model was. That's what it needs to go back to being. And you know, I look at morals and integrity and values, all very important. I think we should be respecting the office. You got people like John Fetterman. Look at the way he dresses and the way he acts. Let's honor the office that we're being asked to do and realize this country plays a leadership role in the world, and other countries are watching how we're running D.C., and it's not a pretty picture.
Let me edit my question to you. Let's just say both parties have lowered the bar.
Okay, I agree with you. Listen, I say that all the time, that it's not just Democrats. We have career politicians on both sides, people who start out, with meager amounts of net worth and end up extraordinarily wealthy. Like in my case, Armstrong, I've divested all of my operating businesses. I don't own a single individual stock. I don't think that people going to D.C. should be able to do that. Certainly should not be able to trade stocks or be there to make their families wealthy. We need to change who we send to D.C. As I've said, if you could suspend reality for a second and we sent the 535 most accomplished Americans to Washington, D.C. to serve this country, knowing that they're going to come home after a period of time, this country would be a totally different country than what we have today. We have to get back to that model.
Bernie Moreno is a candidate for the U.S. Senate in Ohio. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. You know, you gave $10 million of your own money to fund your campaign. Does that give you an advantage? Because most Americans could not even dream of running for office and start by loaning themselves $10 million.
It was $3 million this cycle,
thank you
$4
for
million
correcting
last
me.
cycle, but that's okay. I mean, it's obviously the point is the same.
Yes.
You know, part of the challenge, Armstrong, is that name ID is really important, and because I've never been on a ballot, never held public office, I'm not a celebrity. You have to be willing to make that investment. But in this particular case, in this cycle, like last cycle, I have matched dollar for dollar what I've raised, so I'm not relying exclusively on my money to run this race. I don't believe that we should have a House of Lords in the United States Senate. My opponent in this race, whose family has exponentially more money than I do, has put in $7 million this cycle, $15 million last cycle, and he's raised very little, like $1.7 million. So I don't think you shouldn't rely exclusively on your money, but yeah, I'm going to put a skin in the game. I believe in my message. I believe in going down to DC, and unfortunately, advertising isn't free. So you have to go out there and get your message to make sure that people know who you are, what you believe in, and why you're running.
Share with our national audience who's meeting and hearing of you and your candidacy for the first time the three most important crises facing America today and how you address the three that you're about to name.
Sure. Well, number one is the southern border. As you know, I came here from South America legally when I was a kid, as I said earlier. We need to have legal immigration and zero tolerance for illegal immigration. That means no amnesty. That means reforming our asylum laws to make it clear you can only come here through a designated port of entry. And if you don't, you immediately expelled and forfeit your right for asylum for life. If you come here legally through a designated port of entry, you have to wait in the previous country, Mexico, if that's the port of entry, until your asylum case is heard. That's how we fix the border. We have to wipe out the drug cartels with Mexico as an ally in that effort, not unilaterally. The second one is energy. We have to be energy dominant. We have to give certainty to energy companies that if they make these investments in oil and nuclear and natural gas and coal, that we increase our baseload energy, that they'll have the certainty that the government's not going to put them out of business. And number three, we got to get peace around and tranquility around the world. We have to show might, but that might means not only on the defense, it means that we have a diplomatic corps that leads towards peace. We should be settling the war in Ukraine, not funding another endless war. Those are the three. Today, of course, Joe Biden is the all-you-can-eat buffet of disaster, but those are the three that I would focus on today.
Now, let me share the three that everyday Americans are most concerned about and hear your answer on how you would address their concerns. Crime, fentanyl, and education.
Sure. Well, crime is going to be a local issue, a state and local issue. We have to make certain that we're clear that the bad guys are the criminals, not the police. We have to stand and support the police. We have to make certain that we find ways to pay police a little bit more, make sure we honor their work, have their back. We have to make certain that we have prosecutors that actually punish criminals. In Columbus, Ohio, where I spend enormous amounts of time, we're down 248 police officers, and they're incredibly demoralized, Armstrong, because they'll arrest criminals and they're released later that day, and then they rearrest them over and over again. So we have to get to the point where we are actually punishing criminals, but that's a local issue, and we have to encourage good, strong, conservative leaders at the local level. We talked about the border. That's where fentanyl is coming from. We have to work on the demand side. We have a serious mental health issue in this country. We have to address that. Education is also a local issue. We have to get the federal government completely out of education. The Department of Education should never have been created, needs to be dismantled, and we need to move all of that to the local level and put parents back in charge of their kids' education, not bureaucrats and unions.
How would you vote on the debt ceiling and why?
Well, we can't continue to pass the buck. We're leaving our kids and grandkids a country so massively in debt that eventually we're going to fall over the cliff. 33.6 trillion. We're paying more in interest than we are in any other area. We have to curtail spending. We have to look at the things that we shouldn't be doing. We shouldn't be paying to house illegal migrants here. We shouldn't be sending money to countries that hate us. We should be looking at ways to make government more efficient. In business, we learned something, which is more money does not equal better results. We have to be honest with the American people that say we can't do anything. And we have to get the government out of the incentives business. These electric vehicle mandates, incentives should be eliminated. Let's let the markets work. If we went back to 2019 spending levels, we would actually be in much better shape, given that if we continue to get the tax revenues we got last year, we'd actually have a surplus. We can't keep kicking the can down the road. The reality is we've overspent for decades. Both parties, by the way, both parties have done this. We have to go in there and get our fiscal house in order. By the way, if we don't, the bond market will take care of that and stop lending this country money. And we're going to see an economic collapse unlike any we've ever seen.
Bernie Moreno is a candidate for the U.S. Senate from Ohio. He's a husband, a father, businessman, and not candidate. We'll be back. Something that went viral recently was Osama bin Laden's papers on why he was justified in attacking America on 9/11. And these papers are spreading like wildfire to the younger generation, which they're embracing, saying they have a new perspective on war and a new respect for Osama bin Laden, and they must look at countries like America and Israel as colonizers very differently, and no different than the sympathizers that we have among younger generations at the Ivy League schools and schools like George Washington University, where they find themselves being pro-Palestinian. What do you feel about this? And if you had the opportunity to lecture this growing mindset in this country, what would you say to them?
Armstrong, it absolutely crushes me. I came to this country with my 5 brothers, my sister, my mom, and dad. I can tell you my mom passed away last June. She loved America. She spent 50 years here, lived an American dream that was unbelievable, something that she wouldn't have imagined, for not only for herself, my dad did, my siblings have. Those of us who came from other countries know how special this place is. And to see students be indoctrinated in this idea that America is fundamentally a flawed country is awful. Here's what I'd say to them. Take a trip outside America. Go spend time in other places, and you'll come back here and kiss the ground and pledge allegiance every single day to this great country. We have to stop indoctrinating our children at these colleges and universities. These Ivy League schools specifically live under a tax-free status in which they have these bloated, gigantic administrative departments, these professors that are radicalizing our kids. We should take a hard look at that nonprofit status. We should take a hard look at their Pell Grant and grant eligibility. We have to get boards of trustees that are doing their job. I was the chair of the board at Cleveland State, and we made certain that free speech was respected on campus. And we do in this particular case. But when you have students spreading hate speech, right, on the side of not Palestinians, but of Hamas, we have a deep problem. And we have to wake up and recognize that. And it's going to take all of us to make sure that we correct that.
What do you say to social media giants like TikTok, who spread this propaganda? And there's a mindset that TikTok should be banned altogether, especially given how you feel about freedom of speech.
Well, we have to be careful because the Constitution doesn't allow us to do those things, and we have to respect the Constitution. What I'd say is that we have to reform Section 230 of the Communication and Decency Act to make sure that these platforms are not spreading hate speech, that they take a responsibility for hate speech. We want to have freedom of speech, but when it crosses over to hate speech, we have to recognize that. We can't have the government intervening in that because the government is going to become a censorship engine. We saw that under Joe Biden already. What they can do, though, is make certain that we're respecting the fact that minors are watching a lot of this content. We need to have transparency around their algorithms. Certainly the Chinese Communist Party controls TikTok, very concerning. We need to work with the industry to figure out what the appropriate guardrails are. But we cannot just turn a blind eye and pretend that this isn't affecting us. It is. And I'm very, very concerned about it. The industry needs to take leadership there. Sometimes we look to the federal government to solve all of our problems, when in reality, we should be asking industry to say, hey, listen, these are problems for all of us. You don't want government to set those guardrails because they're not going to do it the right way, but step up and do the right thing. And I think these corporations should be doing that. I look forward to working with them in a cooperative spirit to make sure that we get these guardrails set properly.
Bernie Moreno hails from Ohio, and he's a candidate for the United States Senate. And he joins us, and we'll be back with some final thoughts. If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. If you're alone in a private room with former President Donald Trump and you knew what you shared with him, he would listen and carry forth with it, what would you tell him?
Well, I've had that opportunity many times, and he's a great man. I think he's somebody who will history will look back at him and say he saved the Republican Party.
We get that, but how can he be better? We get the line about how great he is and what he's done for the party, but what can he improve upon if you were advising him?
Spend more time talking about his vision for the future which he's doing. He's created a lot of great video series about what his agenda is, and when he takes over in 2025. I think let people see who he really is. He's a good man. He don't play into the media. They like to take him out of context. He knows that. I think if he lets people see who he really is, people like I have, people will unite behind him. I think we're going to bring this country back together. He's a fighter. He's fierce.
This is a quick soundbite. If you were a United States senator, would you vote for more funding to Ukraine?
No. We got to be driving to peace there, Armstrong. We can't have another endless war. We got to get to a peaceful settlement there. That's what I'd be doing.
How do you make Americans believe in America again? They believe that America is dying, that this chaos is not going to get better, but only worse.
It will get better. We've had hard times in the past. I never bet against America. I believe in this country. We will fix this country. We will get our ideas in place. And by July 4th of 2026, when we celebrate the 250th anniversary of this country, Americans will feel better. America will be back. Our might will be regained, and our identity crisis will be over, and we'll have a country that's back to its original roots of success, of freedom and liberty and individual responsibility. I believe in this country. I'm going to fight for this country until my last breath.
Literally 15 seconds. Why are you running?
I'm running for that. I'm running because one of the things you said is father and husband, but I'm also a grandfather. I have 3 grandkids. I'm fighting for them. I want to have them be able to have the same America that I had, a country that provides unlimited opportunity. That's what this is about.
It has been a pleasure to have you on our platform, Candidate Moreno. We wish you well, and thank you so much for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show.
It was an honor. Thank you.
Our favorite philosopher and constitutional law expert, Bruce Fein, joins us today. The Supreme Court just put in some new ethics, rules, and guidelines. Break it down for us, and what will this mean for the Supreme Court going forward, and what will change?
The important thing, I believe, for the audience to understand is the Supreme Court is unique because there's no court higher that can reverse or second-guess its decisions. And so one of the prominent provisions, or the omissions, if you will, by necessity, because there's only one Supreme Court, is that there's no method by which a justice who says, I do not fall within any of the disqualifying categories, why that can be second-guessed. So basically, you still have the justices being judges or just in their own cases. But the basic provisions are not at all unusual. They're typically the codes of recusal that you see that apply to courts of appeals and federal district courts. There shouldn't be conflict of interest. You shouldn't create the appearance and raise funds for private organizations. There's nothing at all that leaps out that wouldn't to a lawyer say these are customary reasons why you would make a recusal motion even if you hadn't written it down. And I think the big question mark remains is, all right, how then is it going to differ from what happened before when it was simply a case-by-case determination and the justice was the final authority? Because with the current ethics promulgation, the policy statement, there isn't any way in which if a justice says, I'm not disqualified, that can be second-guessed. So we don't know, however, whether or not there'll be a little bit more pressure to recuse because now there's written standards that the public opinion can apply, as opposed to before it was just kind of ad hoc. So I still think it's too early to know.
What are the new guidelines?
Well, the guidelines set forth such things as you should not participate with any group that may have a case that may come before you. You should not participate with any group that may use your name to fundraise. You should not be taking monetary rewards in a way that could create an appearance of partiality or bias with somebody who may have an interest in litigation. Obviously you shouldn't be participating in cases where you have former law partners or spouses that are involved in things like that. So those are customary recusal standards in any event, whether they're written down.
Did any of this massive reporting on Justice Thomas damage him inside the court?
No, I do not believe inside the court, because, to be candid, the most important thing that both inside the court and the public need to know is that there's no allegation, despite all of the examination of Justice Thomas, that any of his votes and decisions were compromised by anybody he visited, whether it's on vacation. And that's the important element, right? We want someone to be completely impartial as best as he can, just apply his understanding of the law to the facts of the case. And no one suggested anybody bought Clarence Thomas's vote, or he would have written this decision differently if he had done something different in the past. So within the court, no, I do not think Justice Thomas.
Why do you think it's obvious to many in the public that it's not just about Justice Thomas, Justice Alito, but it's just Sotomayor, all of them, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg during her days, all of them have the same issue. It's just that the focus of ProPublica was on Justice Thomas and Alito.
Yes, and to be candid, the media has biases like everybody else does, and the media is largely liberal bias. You'll notice that in the coverage there was very little, if anything, said about Abe Forrest. He was the first one who got involved in that. He was a Democrat, very close to Lyndon Baines Johnson. At times he would go in and advise Johnson on the Vietnam War, even though there could be issues of Vietnam coming to the Supreme Court. He was taking private money. He had a retainer with the Wolfson Foundation who had been convicted of securities crimes. He was teaching at the American University and getting stipends, $15,000, $20,000. That's a long time ago when it really was real money. Today it doesn't sound like very much. And he ultimately, he left the bench under Cloud. There were efforts to seek to impeach him. But it was the reason why background is important is say this is not like this is the first time anything like this has been done. But he got kind of kid gloves treatment. And I do believe that and you'll notice when Ruth Bader Ginsburg did things as outrageous as the sitting justice, she is saying that Trump has no business being president. He doesn't have any of the qualifications. Well, everybody knows at the Supreme Court, half their docket is cases from the U.S. government. Trump's going to be involved. And she says that. Well, she got a little bit of a knuckles rap, but nothing. I can guarantee you a conservative say something like that Joe Biden he's a mummy, he couldn't be even a candidate for re-election. It'd be front page news all over. And that's just unfortunately the way that the media operates today. It has their own very, very pronounced biases. And when it comes to the court system, you remember that's why the Dobbs case overruling Roe v. Wade, which even Justice Ginsburg had problems with because the way it was reasoned. It's viewed as a catastrophe. I don't agree with all the reasoning, but Roe v. Wade itself, to go back and read where did this right to privacy, penumbras and emanations come from, is very shoddy intellectual handiwork that was produced to result in Roe versus Wade. All of that gets buried. So the focus is on, the people who are doing things with the results that the media doesn't like.
We'll continue this conversation and get into the Constitution when we return on this national edition of the Armstrong Williams Show.
Armstrong, Armstrong.
We're now joined by Bernard Holloway. You know, why is it that there is so much confusion about what the Constitution is, and you have these activists that want to change the Constitution, and the dangers of that for our own democracy?
So I'd say two things about that. I'd say one, the Constitution when it was written in 1789 was a very long time ago. And so, like, you know, for a lot of, like, people are talking currently about the debate that's going on related to Israel and the Palestinians, and a lot of Gen Z folks and millennials don't have the modern historical recollection that folks of your generation might have about World War II and the impact of the Holocaust. And I think in a similar manner, people's understanding of the founding and original principles seems very distant from the challenges of today, from the challenges of how not only white supremacy, but also how, like, lots of different, like, democratic centrism and Bill Clinton, and, like, how, like, different aspects of the Democratic Party have, like, engaged corporate culture and corporate power are things that make people question and wonder, what does the Constitution do for them? And so I think for some people that believe in it as a living document, it's hard to see some of the current framing of the court as advancing.
Why don't you explain to our national audience what it is that the Constitution does for them?
It preserves liberty. It gives appeals and mechanisms to redress issues with government. It creates constraints on government that, like, actually creates opportunity for enterprise and entrepreneurship to take place. I have a Kauffman Foundation book with me, along with a Lonnie Guinier book, and part of that's because I think the Constitution has two functions and purposes. It creates an overall framework for not just governance, but also the restraint of government to create liberty, but it also ensures some basic and fundamental rights, which is why I believe in the 4th and 14th Amendment very strongly.
But do you also believe that the Constitution needs to be revised?
I personally think the Constitution is a living document. I mean, it's not to make a bad Hillary Clinton reference, but I literally think it's living history. It's history that exists in the archives, but it's history that we, like, live and breathe. I had, like, a book in my bag that's the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, and I think Walter Isaacson's book, and I think everything about that time and understanding the nature and the time of the Enlightenment and the Declaration of the Founding is understanding that it was as tumultuous and uncertain and lively a time as our time is. Like, where people didn't have easy answers, where the fate of the Republic wasn't something that was, like, known and clear from the start.
But isn't it also, when you put this in perspective, that it's incredible back during the 1700s that we had founders that could write such a document that still is so relevant and so strong, even for the times, as much as the world has changed, to the days that we find ourselves in. So
that's why I say it's living history. It's the same way that the Emancipation or Buy an Oven for the People is living history. Or even, you know, Four Freedoms or A Square Deal. They are comments that remind us at our core of the founding documents and the appeals of the founding documents, from the Declaration through the Constitution to the Federalist Papers, which call on us to overcome faction, which call on us to think of government as something that is a product of something that we, the governed, give our consent to. So there's a lot about the founding documents, I think, that are important to admire.
Is there any?
But if it's living history, it could be something that we change. That's what with the amendment process.
But this is what I'm asking you, because I sense there's something that you would tinker with. What would you change?
I personally, I'm like, I'll reframe this differently. I mean, a lot of people could associate Justice Jackson's dissents with this, and I think she could have, like, a long framework and perspective on the liberal side of the court in much of the manner that Justice Thomas has had in setting a new marker for conservative opinion on the court. But to answer your question more specifically, I think the core and the essence of the literal meaning of the 14th Amendment is underappreciated. I think the core and the meaning and the essence of the 4th Amendment is underappreciated. People talk about right to privacy in the context of, like, Roe and Dobbs and a woman's right to choose. I think more fundamentally, the pretext of the 4th Amendment is about not having government and, like, law enforcement unduly be in your backyard. You know, to borrow the Biggie song, to, like, not literally be in the basement on your telephone. And, I think I don't have necessarily amendments to the Constitution that I think are necessary to do that. But I hope our legal and judicial system, you know, including people that I know and like at the Alliance for Justice, are able to push our courts to take interpretation of the existing Constitution as it is more seriously and better, which includes, I think, some literalism and some living interpretation.
Your response?
One thing I'd want to underscore, the framers of the Constitution understood they couldn't perceive the future. They said, hey, we're going to have an amendment process to account for things that we can't conceive. George Washington mentions that in his farewell address. But there's a process. 2/3 of the House and the Senate, 3/4 of the state. There's an alternate method through convention, but it's never been utilized. It means that you have deliberative process. The amendment process can work very fast. The 18-year-old Voting Rights Amendment passed in like 13 weeks. People said you shouldn't be dying on patties in Vietnam if you can't vote.
Sure.
The Civil War amendments were another example. And so the issue isn't whether the Constitution is modern, it's whether we're going to give the judiciary the power to say, oh, I'll just decide that the old Constitution has become obsolete, but what standard do you decide whether it's obsolete? Because we do have a standard by which you say it's obsolete. What do? You amend it. For example, the initial Constitution had the senators elected by state legislatures. Okay? No one said, that's kind of a bad idea because democracy means they ought to be directly elected. They actually ratified the 17th Amendment. The initial Constitution didn't provide for an income tax. They said, oh, we need to get money. So what happened? We have an income tax amendment. Anyway, it could go on and on. Initially, it was unfair. Women lacked the franchise, so we had a women's franchise amendment. That's very, very important because there isn't any standard other than Article 5 of the amendment process by which you can say, oh, this provision is obsolete. They really didn't understand what was going to happen, and so I on my own am going to say, okay, I'm going to make it a living document. This is what it is. That's a real problem. Then you get judicial tyranny.
I'm going to give you a chance to respond when we come back after the break. This is the Armstrong Williams Show. Bernard Holloway and Bruce Fein are our guests as we discussed that living document, the U.S. Constitution. We'll be back. Back to you, Bernard.
Yeah, no, thanks, Armstrong. To answer your earlier question, I actually do think that there's one aspect of the Constitution that does need to be amended. To like Bruce's earlier point, I think there is a process reform element of our electoral process, which is actually, I think, we should have a guaranteed majority that if a majority of people in this country vote for a particular person to be president, that national popular vote by state compact, whether that's the current state compact that's trying to emerge, that's attempting to get 35 states to kind of both do the same model legislation, and if so, have that in and of itself become a constitutional amendment, or just go through the same process that wasn't realized for the ERA, but I think should be done for something like that. One of my earliest life experiences was being in high school and watching Bush v. Gore, and even as like a young millennial, that was one of many things, along with 9/11 and other things that made me question. People talk about faith in government and faith in institutions. That was one of the first things. And so if I had to think about one thing that I think transcends a lot of other traditional divides that I could see becoming like a real constitutional amendment in our times, that would be that.
Well, it was pushed very hard in the 1960s. The American Bar Association, Senator Birch Bayh, had exactly that amendment, and it failed. So you can go back again. I don't have any objection to it. I think a problem with that amendment is that the candidates would no longer even visit small states. They say, where's the population centers? Because it's the total vote is what counts. So they go to California, they go to Texas, Nebraska. No one's ever going to visit Alaska anymore. No one will ever go to Wyoming.
Or South Carolina.
Yeah, or South Carolina. Okay.
I think Congressman Clyburn and the changes on the Democratic side of the aisle have actually changed that, in spite of what happened yesterday in New Hampshire. I think that is actually something that political parties can do to help make sure that we have primaries in the parts of this country that reflect the beauty and diversity.
But I think the larger point in the general election, the smaller constituency would be disempowered.
So I have an interesting reframing. It doesn't have to be a constitutional amendment, but I think, interestingly enough, because of what the current majority has done vis-a-vis Citizens United, and I'm currently working in a Florida race where some of the impact of Citizens United and things that Governor DeSantis has done that has torn down lots of the walls between different aspects of political committees has made me think about this. What do you all think about democracy dollars? And Congressman Sarbanes' bill around giving citizens, money to use and give to political candidates and causes of their choosing, and using that as a mechanism to increase the diversity of the speech landscape.
Yeah, but see, that was utilized. Remember, there was a checkoff.
Which might need a constitutional amendment because of the court.
It was a statute. You could check off dollars on your taxes. It should go to a general fund to fund candidates so they wouldn't have to raise money. nobody checked off the fund. That citizen, it wasn't a huge amount, but they weren't going to have to pay for any of it because it was a deduction from their taxes. So these things have been tried. Maybe the next time they will succeed. But the process is in place to do everything that you want. You just have to get a majority to agree with you. And with regard to the primaries, that's a decision made by the political parties. The Democrats don't need any amendment. If they want to run their primaries so anybody who gets the simple majority vote is going to get the nomination, they can do that. There's no problem. They haven't chosen to do that yet.
So in your opinion, as a former Justice Department official, you believe that if members of Congress were able to get a piece of legislation passed that affirmed public financing for campaigns, that would hold constitutional muster?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's a shadow of a doubt that that's true. We do have public financing for presidential campaigns if you want to take it. Obama was the first one who said, no, I can raise way more money privately. I'm not going to take the public money.
Yep.
You did the analogy between Justices Jackson and Thomas. Is there ever an instance in your reading Justice Thomas's opinions where he did not follow the Constitution?
So, I will actually, no. I will give one example, like Armstrong, and actually I have like an interesting personal example that I could separately go at that kind of helps me understand a little bit of his entry to the court and part of the challenges he takes as a black man in American society to this work. Which I share too.
You see him as a black man, not a
which
jurist?
I mean as both. Because I think it's impossible for me to see anyone. It's impossible for me to see Barack Obama as a half Kenyan,
but the
half
Constitution
Kansan president.
It's
correct. What I was getting at is that there's a lot of...
Hold on. Let me take a break.
Okay.
Because I want to come back
Okay.
to your answer.
Okay.
We'll be back.
Okay.
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Please continue, Bernard.
So I would actually start with like two things, a compliment and a critique. The compliment is actually, I think I tend to agree as a community development practitioner a lot with like Justice Thomas on takings and eminent domain and the importance of preserving private property rights, because as a young African American man that works on a lot of transportation issues, there's a lot of Robert Moses history of segregation, white supremacy, misuse of government power, however you want to describe it, as it relates to like inappropriate takings. The critique I would offer is I actually had a chance to meet him back in 2006 and asked him a question about a recent ruling on using the death penalty against juveniles, which he was like in the dissenting set of folks. Again, it was like a Kennedy decision. And I think my disappointment is I think he views the court and the country as a jurist, as you said, Armstrong. But I think sometimes that misses the humanity that people bring to cases and circumstances, whether it's from voting rights or making sure that we don't apply the death penalty to juveniles.
But justices
or other challenges.
Justices overall cannot be about feelings.
No.
We live it.
But no,
there's
not the
pardon
justices,
power.
though.
Humanity, there's a pardon power, so
Yes.
governors can pardon people if there's an injustice or the tie's young. You got to preserve your jurisdiction and not go beyond
I personally don't think that, like, I don't believe in the death penalty personally. And then beyond that, I don't think, especially, we should be subjecting our least able and most impressionable people in our society to be eligible for it.
But they're subjecting
and so
themselves to it.
So because that wasn't a
their
consideration.
behavior,
So because
not their identity that they're being judged by.
So because that wasn't a consideration in 1789, does that not make it valuable, viable, and necessary to preserve the rights of those people now?
But many states do that. The death penalty is outlawed in maybe something like, at least 12, 15, 17 states. And they could make it all. The death penalty was out of the federal government for long years. They finally came back with a very narrow death penalty statute. So the Constitution doesn't prohibit any state or the federal government from saying, we don't want a death penalty. Congress could enact tomorrow a statute that said no death penalty. Any state could. So you just need to make better arguments.
But I really hope that like my life and liberty in the 14th Amendment isn't subject to the whims of a state constitution, isn't subject to the whims of a current fashion of who's in majority to govern the scope
But you're
of my
reading-
personal
you're reading
liberties.
the text.
As a young black gay man, it
You're-
matters to me where I can get married
You're airbrushing the
and where
text.
sodomy is
The
and isn't illegal.
Constitution-
Now it's personal.
The-
The Constitution,
that is part,
but the
that is part of
Constitution
my
should not
identity
be
as a complex
but the
person,
Constitution
as a pragmatic
the
progressive,
Constitution has only
as an
one
out and proud gay man,
identity,
as a
Bernard.
strong, committed
it has
supporter
to
of
be
abortion
colorblind.
rights.
Yeah.
It cannot see your sexual
As a criminal
preference.
justice reformer,
But-
as a drug policy abolitionist,
You-
those identities matter
We're
to
out
me
of time.
personally.
I
The
know we're out
text
of
of the
time. See you.
Constitution says you can
Goodbye.
take
See you.
life with due process.
Thank you.
You can't read that out of the text.
Listen, thank you so much for joining us. We'll continue this. You know, listen, the Constitution